Have you ever wondered what goes on beneath the covers of a book? Peter Goodwin, master bookbinder, will show the skill and time involved in repairing a family Bible. Many of these precious volumes seem to have fallen into disrepair, and it is a problem to know what to do about them. It needs an expert, someone who knows all about restoration. Peter Goodwin hails from Nottingham in England. He served a 7-year apprenticeship and then worked for many years as a bookbinder for Boots the Chemists. Later, he became bindery manager for the Auckland Public Library in New Zealand. Why do they fall to pieces? Mainly because of the acid factor. Leather needs to be tanned using the vegetable method, and of course the demand for these Bibles in Victorian times was so great, the tanners did not have time to prepare the leather in the right way. So for speed they used mineral salts. But over a period of time this tends to rot the leather, so you get a breakdown in the joint where the flexing takes place. Paste and paper take time to dry, so the Bible will be repaired over many days. Bookbinding takes time.
Well, having had a quick look at the book, the next thing is to start stripping it down, to just examine the back area and the spine to see just how much damage there is. And the first thing to do is to remove the brass edge binding to which the clasps are fixed. These are held in place by rivets. And as with most rivets, they're usually burred over, so you've got to prise them out. And so with a little bit of luck it should come off. Here we are. That's the top one removed. Well, the next thing is, now having got the brass edge binding off, we have to now remove the cover from the book itself, so we can get at the spine area to see the state of the sewing. And we cut through the cloth joint with a knife, and that allows the cover to drop off there. And do the back. And now the book is out of the case is removed. Usually you find a lot of debris and all sorts of things inside which you don't want. A way of dust, the dust of ages. Silverfish sometimes appear. Other creepy crawlies. Now we just pull back the machine sewn headband. It's only stuck on. I've noticed that this front plate has got a lot of marking on it, whether it's foxing or just fly specks or age, I don't know. So the thing to do is to place a piece of plate glass under the plate so that the water doesn't migrate into the body of the book, and with some tepid water just lightly sponge. When the water is on the paper, of course the foxing will become even more evident, because the paper is weak where the acid has attacked the paper, and it becomes semi-transparent. But as the water evaporates and dries out, then of course it will go back to being opaque again. Well, we've taken the cover off. I've also removed the top lining of paper on the hollow, and we're down now to the glue on the spine. This allows us to examine the sewing, and we find that the kettle stitch is broken away quite considerably at the head here, and also it's a bit of a dog's dinner at the bottom also. So in order to do the job properly, we now have to take the book completely to pieces and to re-sew it. First of all, we remove the old flyleaf and the old cloth joint which has failed, and put that to one side. The next is the frontish piece, which is heavily water stained, and there's also a certain amount of foxing which I might sort of clean up, make it a bit more presentable. And then we start to find the centre of the front section. As with most of these Victorian books, they are what they call overcast. That is to say, the sewing is overcast as a reinforcing method, but to my mind it defeats its object, because it tends to hold the section so tight that the book doesn't really open flat, and this to me is a bit of a weakness because it places undue strain on this section. In the centre of the section you will find the sewing thread, which we can cut through. Well, we've got sections A and B here together, and we come now to the first signature here. That little C indicates the start of the next section. The book is being knocked out now to loosen the glue. Now what we can do here, very carefully, is dress the feathered edge. With a tear you get a feathered edge. That can be dressed with the adhesive. Placing a piece of clean paper underneath. Now the book's been taken to pieces, we're setting up the sewing frame for the actual sewing. This is on 5 lay cords, and these are lined up with the original grooves from the original sewing, which is there. So those are lined up now, ready. And to sew the book, you start from the back. The needle with the thread goes in at the kettle stitch at the end here. The left hand is inside the section which receives the needle. The needle comes out round the cord, leaving a small tail at the end which you'll need to tie off with on the return of the second section there. Then round the cord and back in again. You work along to the next cord, come out of that hole. Very carefully. The paper is very fragile with it being old, so you've got to be very careful you don't get any tears. Always pull the needle with the thread through the way that you're sewing. Don't pull backwards, otherwise you'll tear the paper. Back in again and repeat again round the next cord. Return the needle round the cord into the hole and and round to the last lay cord, which is there. The end hole here is what they call the kettle stitch. The thread comes out of there. You can then lay the section flat on the baseboard that you have, and very carefully and gently pull the cord tight to take out all the slack. You don't want any loops inside. Press the section down flat, and that's the first section on. And by pulling the thread tight, then it draws the lay cords into that recess, and you'll end up at the end with a flush back, we hope. Then you take the next section, and this is 7B, that was 7C, so we're coming back up the alphabet. Always check that the signatures are in the right order. And having come out at the head of the book, we then return in at this end and work our way back down the section. And tie off with this tail here in a normal knot, so that the first and second sections are then secure. And we repeat the process as we did on one. And as we've got another 6 alphabets to work through, we're looking at about nearly 160 sections to sew before the book is complete. And at a section a minute, that's 160 minutes. So you're looking at nearly 3 hours work for somebody who is dexterous, but me in my decrepit years, it might take a little bit longer. Yeah, the section knocker in German is Das Section Knocker. Hello, we've got a rib there as well. It took about 4.5 hours, so that's not bad going really for 160 odd sections. Well, what we've done now with this frontispiece is to clean it. It consists of doing it in a bath with a weak solution of bleach. This has lifted the foxing and also the water staining that was in this bottom corner, and having watched it very carefully that the foxing has gone, we then take it out of the weak solution of bleach and put it into a bath of cold water and leave it there for twice as long at least, in order to neutralise the bleaching action so that the paper is not damaged. We've now taken the frontispiece which we've cleaned earlier, and it's now dry, and repaired the back area which was a little bit thinned, and now I'm going to attach 2 buckram joints prior to doing the actual fly leaves. We're using a PVA glue on this, and we've just glued the edge, the leading edge of this buckram, which then goes parallel to the joint. And when these are nipped and dried, we'll then do the next part of the end paper, which is the fly leaf which goes over the top. Best to have the book on a board so that it's supported. Right, we're going to put the book in the press now and give these joints a nip, and then tomorrow when we get back to work, they should be dried and ready to continue. And now we're going to attach the original fly leaf to the book, which will sit up to that cloth joint there. Now with the front fly leaf, which has an inscription on it, we still have with us the original cloth joint which had split. So to remove this, as carefully as possible. You place the flyleaf face down, and when you find yourself a sharp knife, hence the plaster on the thumb, and to do this very carefully with a sharp knife, bring it back at 45-degree angle and peel away, leaving the paper flat. This allows you to remove the cloth in most cases without taking anything off the paper. See how cleanly it's coming away. If you were to try and bend the paper to take it off the cloth in the reverse, more than likely the paper would feather, and then you have to do some more repairing. Because when you get to the very end, be very careful that you support the paper with the edge of the knife. And always make quite sure you've got the front on the front. In a case like this, you don't want to end up with something back to front. Right, well, we've got the book now in the backing press. It's been rounded, and the reason we round it is because with our 160 sections, you can imagine we've got 160 pieces of the thread lying in the back, which creates a certain amount of swell. And if you can imagine our pieces of thread lying in the fold of each section, when it goes through an arc as opposed to the straight, the thread is staggered, and so therefore that reduces the swell. The book is placed in the lying press, and there's sufficient amount of the joint exposed which is equal to the thickness of the board of the case, which is here, so that when the backing takes place, this will then create a joint for the board to sit into and for the end papers or the joints to hinge on.
Peter is now going to restore the original headbands. These are pieces of worked coloured silk that can be found at the head and tail of leather-bound books. Having cleaned the headbands, Peter attaches them to the book. He pastes first the headband and then the book to make them stick firmly. Headbands are often misused to pull a book from the shelf.
Leave that as it is now to all settle down and dry before we move it, so we don't disturb it. The next operation is to do the lining up, and for this I'm going to use a piece of mull. This is like an open wove bandage with a little bit of dressing in it. I'm putting a piece down the middle for a start, because a book of this weight needs support in the middle in the first instance. Okay. Now we've got the piece of mull, as I say, which is 3 times the width of the back, and this is placed equidistant over the whole of the spine, joint to joint, there, and there's sufficient to come back at a later stage to secure the paper linings. One of the biggest faults with books is that the joint, the hinge, is the first thing to fail. This is due to the just wear and tear of the flexing of the material over a period of years. So any extra strength you can build into that joint area at this stage will help to prolong the life of the book. Running a bit short of paper. And now we're going to place a piece of craft paper level with the joint, flush there with the joint, and bring this over. Now what happens now is that the paper will start to stretch. Those of you who've done any wallpaper will know the problems with paper stretching and causing blebs. So at this stage we've got to work at it and get rid of all the stretch that occurs in the paper, so that it sits nice and tight on the back and there's no pockets of air, because where the paper is not sticking there'll be no support. It's very essential at this stage that the back has all the support it can get. So you spend a bit of time working at the paper and getting all the wrinkles out of it. Just the grain, of course, in the paper is running head to tail, as it should do, so you get an even stretch. If you had a cross grain paper, the thing would be stretching that way and you'd never sort of end up with anything. And then with a sharp knife you trim it off flush with the joint. Now we're going to leave this now for 24 hours. So what I propose to do now is to separate the spine leather from the actual board, and we'll do this by cutting down with our shears flush with the board. We're going to lace these boards back on to the book, and so in order to do that we've got to sort of pull back very carefully the end paper to leave us enough board showing to put our holes through for the lacings. Right, to do this we've got to run our folder very carefully under the leather, between the leather and the board, and depending on how fragile the leather is and whether it responds to this treatment, it's coming away reasonably well. It's sort of a rolling action with the folder. And now the tricky part is at both ends is we've got to put a slit along the edge of the board so that this leather can peel this way and then the leather underneath can peel that way, in order for our new material to be introduced into the spine area. So with our sharp knife once more, very carefully eases itself in and cuts along the edge of the board. Having done that, we then can bring our folder through and relieve that leather on the bevel part there, and so that gives us a reasonable reveal.
Peter is now going to attempt the impossible. He is going to retrieve the inscription that is stuck to the front board of the book in one piece. He cuts carefully around the edge and then pares the paper away from the corner. Then, using one of the tricks of the trade, he rolls it off using a piece of doweling. Et voila, rescued.
But the next job will be to relace the boards back on. You make a small groove where the marks are. This is done so that the cord can be recessed into this groove and it won't show a lump on the top of the leather. I'm now punching a hole at the end of the groove, which is about a centimetre in from the edge of the board, and then you check on the underside to see if the holes have come through, which they have. Then very carefully you make quite sure that the leather is not in the way. Then you have to punch a return hole at an angle from the first. The next job is to dress the slips with a modicum of paste. Now we don't paste the whole slip right through to its base at this point in time. We want to leave the groove unpasted at the moment while we're doing the covering part. And when this finally goes down, then these slips will be pasted up, and we then roll the slips between your hands, very much like waxing the moustaches of the Sergeant Major. Right, now we come to the lacing. What happens here? The slip is pushed through the hole. We hope. Now we have to return the cords back through the second hole to the outside. Of course, having sticky fingers is always a problem. And then we take hold. Right, now the board is laced on, and all the slips are through both holes. Now with our hammer we close the holes up, remove the ends of the slips. Now we're going to consolidate those holes. We then spin it over and repeat on the inside of the board. Come to the stage now for the lining up of the spine. This falls into two categories. You can either have a book with a tight back, what is known as a tight back, or a hollow back. This is a full leather, and this has a hollow to it, so that when the book is opened there is a hollow which allows the actual back of the book to move away from the actual binding, and it doesn't get creased. With this Bible, it's a limp binding, limp board, and this is a tight back, and therefore there's no hollow at all. The leather is stuck directly to the spine. Consequently, any creasing that takes place could affect any finishing that's placed on the back. So on this type of binding, the finishing is a minimum. Right, now we're going to make the hollow on this book. We've already done the mull and the first liner. So this is achieved by marking the joint there, and this has got a fold, so we mark the paper there also to match, and measure the width of the spine, top and bottom. In making these hollows there are two schools of thought. One is to glue the back and make the hollow actually on the book, but you're left with the problem of having to tip this edge here with glue to get it to stick, so that when you come to bring over this on the return, we don't get this floating around all over the place. And I find from experience that the back is never as tight as you really want it. So I belong to the school of thought where we make this hollow on the flat. I do them on the flat because once the back has settled down, when you present it to the book, which is in a slight curve, this will then take up any slack that might be there. Paper stretches when it gets wet, so there's always a little bit of stretch, and by doing this way we get rid of all the pockets, and we get it back as tight as possible, which is the ideal situation.
At this point, Peter signs his work, where it will be hidden until the Bible is re-restored many years in the future.
Put our fingers under the end there so it doesn't get broken. We've got our hollow here. There's the single sheet of paper, and that's the glued part, so there's two thicknesses of paper there. We've got our one piece of paper on the book already, so we put our mark, which we did, to the mark side on this side here, so that we should have an accurate just check that we're level with the joint. So now we've got two pieces of paper on the spine, glued to the spine, then we've got the hollow, and then we've got those two off. So that's two on and two off at the moment. Now we come to getting rid of this piece of mull that we left hanging over the side, which is equal to the width of the book. Now the reason I do this is that in most books it's always the joints that fail, and to give a little bit of extra strength to this piece of folded paper, if this mull is then glued back over this way, we have an extra length of mull running down the fold. And we're going to repeat the operation on this side. We now take the mull over from this side, this joint, and repeat the operation again. So we've got mull over both joints now, reinforcing the paper. Now we bring this over again, pull it over tightly. We've got two liners on the book, then the hollow. Now this will be the fourth piece of paper off the book, and those four thicknesses of paper plus the two thicknesses of mull should give us quite a good foundation for us to attach the new spine to. Put it into shape, try and keep the round as much as possible in place. The lining up we did yesterday is dry. We can now trim off the heads and tails level with the headband. On opening the book, you'll see that the hollow presents itself from yesterday, and what I'm going to do now is just do a small slit up the hollow with a sharp knife, top and bottom, and this will allow our material to be turned in down there. In this particular book, as we have more of the back to put back, it is in reasonable condition considering. I'm going to use library buckram to actually reback the book. This is less bulky than leather and will sit under there without creating too much of a ridge. And then when that's dry, we can then remount the old leather into its proper position on the spine. If the book was in such a deteriorated state that this leather was not usable, then we could reback with Morocco leather and retool the book. When we did the lacings earlier, we didn't actually paste the ends of the slips, left those free from the paste, and now we've come to actually attach the backing material. We can now paste up these slips because there'll be no more movement over the joint area while we do this operation. So we run some paste in to the grooves that we cut. We've now got the board in position, and we can now paste down these slips. This buckram is a very waterproof material, and without this dressing of methylated spirits, the glue will not adhere to it as it should do. Having glued the buckram, we'll now glue the spine. That's placed there over the joint and rub down. And then very carefully we take out all the air and bubbles that might be there. Having glued the cloth, this buckram and the paper spine, we should get a good union there. And then we spin it over, and then we bring this over onto this joint here. You will notice that I've not glued the turning at this moment. I've masked it off with a masking tape, so that when we do come to do the turning, we shan't have an extra layer of glue there. And I've just placed a folder in both sides here to open up this spine area. There's a small split there. This will allow us to glue this, and we've turned back the leather turn-ins there out of the way. Apply some glue to the buckram, and then very carefully roll this in. It's sort of a rolling action with the thumb. Turn it right in flush with the thing. Now, of course, the folders that we've placed in the joint now need to come out, and then finish off by making sure that the cloth is sitting flat and level, and also make sure that this is well over onto the board here and tighten the joint so that there's no gaps. Just ease the cloth over, keeping it flat, and then it'll be flush with the edge of the headband. If you were to replace the back with leather, this would not be quite flush with the headband, because you'd need so much of the material to go over to form the cap. But as we're going to hope to replace this, then this wants to be flush so that we've got room to turn this in on it. We can now glue this part here of that leather and get that back into position. We're going to just glue these turn-ins back, so it wants to be nice and tight. Now we're going to do the other side. Now it's looking a bit more like a book. The board is placed along the joint there, and this will hold down this newly piece of glued leather with some suitable weights. We'll hold it down. And so to bed. We come now next to fixing back the old spine leather. This is rather frayed, of course, and perished at the head and tail, which we'll have to sort of clean up. But what's happened in taking the old spine away, we've lost the piece of the string that laid here, which made the false bands. So to replace those, I have some leather which has a paper backing to it, and I shall cut some strips wide enough for the band. And this is done with a knife and straight edge. Just work to the points there. And then these can be glued into place before the back is then resighted. They'll go there into the necessary position. There's 5 of them. Those are just trimmed at an angle because that's going to be turned in down the spine. In order to reduce that ridge of thickness, we just have to get our paring knife now and very carefully pare the edge and thin the edge down to a fine feathered edge, so that when the back is stuck on, there won't be a ridge showing. We measure the length of our false bands here, remembering that we don't want them going right to the edge, otherwise they'll poke out the side. So we've got to stop these bands a short distance from the actual edge of the leather, so we can mark that. Music while you work. Glue the back now. I'm going to leave the turn-ins unglued at this point, and we can work on those once we've got the back nice and settled in and we're happy that it's in its correct position. We'll just give it a modicum of adhesive here. It'll help the glue on the leather to bond with it. Now we present that's our guideline there, is where the old turn-in went round the cap. So we'll work from the tail and just press very gently using the heel of the thumb here to form the leather into position on the spine, and then with our thumbs just work from the centre outwards to take any loose or bubbles and things out of the way. I'm just going to sharpen up these bands with the edge of the folder, because there might be an extra little bit of glue lying in there trapped, so if we work it out we shall have a better sort of finish to it. And very similar to when we did the original turn-in with the buckram, we do the same again for the leather. So we can do the turn-in. Universal PVA glue that we use these days. It's a bit quicker drying than paste. Paste used to have to take 24 hours to set. We just roll that round with the thumb, making sure that it sits nice and tight to the new spine material underneath. You don't want any gaps there. And when you're happy that that's in position, very carefully we bring the book together, remove the 2 folders, and then check. There's not much you can do with these old leather spines. The leather's so perished that you're not able really to set a proper cap as you would do on a new leather book. Right, we've got the we've got the head and tail now turned in. The next job is to get these cloth joints down onto the board. So we look around for a little weight, something to support the board. We place a piece of waste paper under our buckram joint, and then we can glue this. The next thing is to get it well over onto the face of the board. We don't want any pockets of air behind this. It needs to be well firmly glued and secure onto there. We now place a couple of boards there which are equal to the thickness, because we want this to dry out in the open position. When doing leather books, if you let the joint dry in the closed position, it shrinks, or could shrink, and then it becomes tight. And then subsequently when you open the book, it tends to pull away on the end paper and create stress in the joint. So while it's drying, we place a couple of boards in there, and providing the bench is clean underneath, because we don't want to get the book dirty, we then place that there for the joint to dry out, and while that's happening we can do the other side. We now leave it in the open position for it to dry and come back to that till tomorrow. And Bob's your uncle. Well, it's now 24 hours since we put the joints down, and just check them now to see if they are as they should be. The book's been closed for a while with a force in the joint. The idea of a force is that when you close the book up, it allows the materials to shrink as it dries out onto that situation. Then when the force is removed, it closes. You have that extra little bit of room there, and it closes flat.
Peter now replaces the brass edging.
It always pays to have a good circle of friends, because this was deficient of one of the clasps, and having a friend who is a bit of a model engineer, I've managed him to get one made. Put the pin back into the hinge, and then and that fits back into position. You get a royalty from Brasso. Of course, I only use Brasso in a case like this. Nice clean hands for my public. And prior to mounting the old board papers back again, I'm just going to put a wee drop of water on the rubbish on the back of the paper, just lightly dampen it, and this should ease. Just rub it in with the fingers, just massage it in. You don't want to flood this, because if you get the water on the wrong side, you could damage any inscriptions which we might have, which is under there. There's a modicum there of damp there. On there.